Everyone noticed the missing chair. In a wedding filled with white roses, polished silver, and carefully practiced smiles, one empty seat stood out more than all the decorations combined. It was in the very front row, close enough to the bride to matter, close enough for everyone to notice. Just hours before the ceremony began, the small card placed on that chair had quietly been removed. It once read one simple word, Grandma. At her younger sister's wedding, one person should have been sitting there. Everyone knew it. Family friends knew it. Neighbors knew it. Even distant guests who barely understood the family history could feel that something was wrong. Because Grandma Evelyn was not the kind of woman people forgot to invite. She was the woman who raised both girls when their parents were too busy trying to keep life together. She was the one who packed school lunches, remembered every birthday, attended every graduation, and called every Sunday without fail. She was the keeper of family recipes, family photos, and family peace. If there was one person everyone expected to see at that wedding, it was her. But she wasn't there. No explanation. No warning. Just silence. At first, the whispers were soft, almost polite. Maybe she was sick. Maybe she had fallen. Maybe she was too tired to travel. But as the ceremony went on, and as the bride, Emma, avoided every question about her grandmother with the same cold smile, people began to understand this wasn't an accident. Grandma Evelyn had not been forgotten. She had been excluded, and no one could understand why. Even her older sister, Claire, stood through the ceremony with questions burning inside her. Claire had always been the calm one, the peacekeeper, the daughter who noticed what others ignored. She had asked Emma about Grandma weeks before the wedding, and the answer she got was short and sharp. She's not coming. No reason. No room for discussion. Claire had stared at her sister, waiting for more, but Emma had simply turned away and continued choosing flowers as if she had just commented on the weather. That was the first moment Claire felt something shift. Because Emma loved appearances. She loved perfect photographs, polished details, and moments people would remember. Excluding Grandma from the biggest day of her life made no sense, unless the reason was bigger than pride. And Grandma herself had said almost nothing. That silence was the loudest part. When Claire visited her 2 weeks before the wedding, she expected anger, maybe tears, maybe disappointment. Instead, Evelyn sat in her usual kitchen chair, stirring tea she barely drank, looking out the window like she was waiting for rain. Claire finally asked the question everyone was too afraid to say. Grandma, why aren't you going to the wedding? Evelyn paused for so long Claire thought she hadn't heard. Then she gave a small smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, Sometimes, people make choices because they think it protects them. Sometimes, you let them. That was it. No blame. No fight. Just acceptance. And somehow, that made it worse. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happened next would turn one wedding into a family reckoning no one was prepared for. As Emma walked down the aisle that afternoon, every guest stood to admire her. She looked exactly how she had planned for years. Perfect dress, perfect makeup, perfect smile. Her fiancé, Daniel, waited at the altar with tears in his eyes, and for a moment, everything looked like the happy ending everyone had expected. But Claire couldn't stop staring at that empty space in the front row. Their mother, Linda, noticed it too. She kept adjusting her necklace, glancing toward the entrance every few minutes like she was hoping Evelyn might still appear. Their father, Robert, sat stiff and silent, avoiding everyone's eyes. This wasn't just awkward. It was fear, and Claire could feel it. During the vows, Emma's voice shook only once, when the officiant mentioned family. Just for a second, her expression changed. It was quick, almost invisible, but Claire saw it. A flicker of guilt. Or anger. Maybe both. Something had happened. Something no one was saying. The reception was supposed to erase the tension. Music played, champagne flowed, and guests laughed loudly enough to pretend nothing was wrong. But whispers followed every table. Where's Evelyn? Did they have a fight? Why would Emma do this? By sunset, the questions were too heavy to ignore. Claire finally pulled her parents aside near the parking lot, away from the music and the fake smiles. This isn't normal, she said. I'm going to Grandma's house. Linda's face changed immediately. No, she said too quickly. Claire frowned. Why not? Because tonight is your sister's wedding, Linda snapped. Don't create drama where there isn't any. But Claire knew her mother well enough to hear the panic underneath. That was all the confirmation she needed. She looked at her father. Robert said nothing, but his silence said enough. Something was very wrong, and if no one else was going to face it, she would. Within 30 minutes, while Emma was cutting her wedding cake and smiling for photographs she would later hate looking at, Claire and her parents were driving across town to Grandma Evelyn's house. The roads were quiet. No one spoke. Streetlights passed over the windshield in slow flashes, each one making the silence heavier. Claire kept replaying every strange moment from the past few months. Emma becoming distant. Grandma growing quieter. Their mother snapping at simple questions. It all felt connected now, like pieces of a puzzle finally turning toward each other. When they pulled into the driveway, the house looked normal. The porch light was on. The curtains were drawn. Her flower pots were still neatly arranged by the steps. But something about it felt wrong. Too still. Too quiet. Claire knocked first. No answer. She called out. Nothing. Then she tried the handle. Unlocked. Linda inhaled sharply behind her. Grandma Evelyn never left her door unlocked. Never. Claire stepped inside first. The house was silent. No television. No radio. No humming from the kitchen where Evelyn usually cooked, even when no one was coming over. Just silence. Her glasses were still on the dining table. A cup of tea sat beside them, cold and untouched. And on the kitchen counter, under the soft yellow light, was a folded note. Claire reached for it. Her hands were shaking before she even opened it. 6 words were written in Grandma Evelyn's careful handwriting. I'm sorry. It had to happen. Linda collapsed into the nearest chair. Robert turned pale. And Claire, standing in the middle of the kitchen where every family Christmas had begun, realized this was never just about a wedding invitation. This was about something buried, something old, something their family had spent years pretending never happened. And somewhere inside that quiet house, the truth was waiting. Claire stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the note as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less frightening. But they stayed exactly the same. I'm sorry. It had to happen. Written in Grandma Evelyn's neat handwriting, the kind she used for birthday cards, grocery lists, and little reminders tucked into lunchboxes when the girls were children. Simple words. Ordinary words. But in that moment, they felt heavier than anything Claire had ever read. Linda's hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold the edge of the table. Robert had gone completely silent, staring at the untouched tea like it held answers he didn't want to face. Claire looked at both of them, and for the first time in her life, she saw fear in her parents that had nothing to do with the present. This was older than the wedding, older than Emma's anger, older than all the careful silences that had shaped their family. Tell me what's going on, Claire said. No one answered. Her voice rose. Right now? No more pretending. Linda closed her eyes as if the sound of her daughter's voice physically hurt. This is not the place. Claire stepped closer. Then where? Because Grandma is gone, Emma is pretending everything is fine, and both of you look like you've been waiting for this day your whole lives. Robert finally spoke, but it was barely above a whisper. We thought we had more time. Claire turned to him. More time for what? Before he could answer, Linda stood up suddenly. She left something. Claire frowned. What? Linda looked toward the hallway leading to Evelyn's bedroom. Her face had lost all color. She always said, if the truth ever mattered more than peace, she'd leave it there. Without another word, Linda walked down the hallway like someone following a path she had memorized years ago and prayed she would never have to take. Claire followed. Robert came last. Grandma Evelyn's bedroom looked untouched. The bed was neatly made. The lamp by the nightstand still glowed softly. Her favorite blue sweater hung over the chair by the window. It looked like she had simply stepped out for a moment and would return any second, asking why everyone was standing in her room. Linda walked straight to the closet, not searching, knowing. She pushed aside winter coats, old boxes, and neatly folded blankets until her hand reached the back corner of the lowest shelf. There it was, a wooden box, dark oak, small enough to carry, heavy enough to matter. Claire stared at it. You knew this was here? Linda nodded once. I hoped I'd never have to open it. Taped to the top was a single envelope with familiar handwriting. For my granddaughters. Only when the truth matters more than comfort. Claire felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't family drama. This was history. And somehow, Emma had known. Linda sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the box like it might explode if touched. Robert stood near the door, unable to come closer. Claire picked it up herself and placed it on the bed between them. "No more secrets," she said. No one argued. Inside were old photographs first. Black and white ones Claire had never seen before. Evelyn as a younger woman. Linda as a teenager. A hospital room. A newborn baby wrapped in a pale blanket. Then letters. Dozens of them. Some tied with ribbon. Others folded so many times the paper looked ready to break. And beneath them, official documents. Birth records. Hospital forms. Adoption papers that were never fully completed. Claire pulled out one paper and read the name. Then she read it again. Her heart stopped. Because the birth certificate did not list Linda as Emma's mother. It listed Evelyn. Grandma Evelyn. Claire looked up slowly. "No." Her voice cracked. "No, that's wrong." But Linda was already crying. The kind of crying that comes when someone has spent years holding their breath. Robert sat down heavily, staring at the floor. And Claire understood. Emma wasn't just their younger sister in the way she had always believed. She was Linda's daughter, born when Linda was 16, raised as Evelyn's child. A secret passed off as survival. A lie built so carefully it became their entire family. Claire stepped backward like the room itself had betrayed her. All these years. Linda nodded through tears. She was mine. The silence after that sentence was unbearable. Claire tried to speak, but the words refused to come. Every memory shifted at once. Every family dinner. Every birthday. Every argument. Every moment Emma had looked at Linda with anger Claire never understood. It all made sense now. And somehow, that made it worse. "She knew?" Claire asked. Linda looked down. She found out when she was 17. Claire covered her mouth. Emma had known for years. She had walked through every holiday, every conversation, every forced smile carrying that truth alone. And Grandma Evelyn, who had been the center of everything, had carried the other half. "Why didn't you tell me?" Claire whispered. Linda's answer came fast, almost desperate. "Because we thought we were protecting everyone." Claire laughed once, bitter and sharp. "Protecting who?" No one answered. Because there was no good answer. Only choices. Old choices made by frightened people. And consequences that had waited patiently for decades. Claire sat down, holding the birth certificate and shaking hands. She thought of Emma at the wedding altar, smiling for cameras while carrying this history inside her chest. She thought of Grandma Evelyn sitting alone somewhere tonight, knowing the truth had finally reached the people she loved most. And she thought of that empty chair in the front row. It wasn't just a missing guest. It was a message. Emma hadn't left Grandma out because of simple anger. She had done it because that wedding was never just a celebration. It was a line in the sand. A final demand for the truth to stop hiding. Claire looked at her mother. "Why now?" Linda wiped her face. "Because Emma told Evelyn she was done pretending. She said if Grandma sat in that front row smiling like nothing happened, she would tell everyone. Daniel. His family. Every guest." Claire's chest tightened. "So Grandma chose to stay away." Linda nodded. "She said if Emma needed that space to breathe, she would give it to her. Even now. Even after everything. Grandma Evelyn had chosen peace over pride." Claire opened another envelope from the box. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first line read, "If you are reading this, then the truth has finally become louder than silence." And suddenly, Claire understood this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Claire held the letter carefully, as though the paper itself carried the weight of every year her family had spent pretending. The room was so quiet she could hear Linda trying to steady her breathing and the old clock in Evelyn's hallway ticking like it had witnessed every secret and chosen never to speak. Claire unfolded the pages slowly. She already knew whatever was written there would change the way she remembered her childhood forever. The handwriting was unmistakably Grandma Evelyn's, firm, neat, and calm. "If you are reading this, then the truth has finally become louder than silence. I prayed this day would never come, not because the truth should stay hidden, but because I hoped love would be enough to protect all of you from the pain of it. I see now that silence can become its own kind of wound." Claire swallowed hard and kept reading. When Linda was 16, she was still a child herself. She was bright, stubborn, and terrified. She fell in love with a boy who promised forever and disappeared the moment forever became real. In those days, people were less forgiving. A pregnant teenage girl was not seen as someone needing help. She was seen as shame. I was afraid the world would swallow her whole. Linda covered her face. Claire looked at her mother and, for the first time, saw not the strong woman who always controlled every room, but the frightened girl she had once been. The letter continued. I made a choice. Maybe the wrong one. Maybe the only one I believed I had. I told Linda I would raise the baby as my own. I told her she could finish school, have a future, and one day be free of the whispers that destroy young women before they even begin living. I thought I was saving her. I never asked if I was stealing something from her in the process. Claire's hands were trembling now, because this wasn't written by a villain. It was written by someone who had loved badly, but loved deeply. I named her Emma. From the moment I held her, she became mine in every way except blood. Every fever, every first step, every nightmare, every birthday candle, I was there. But love does not erase truth. It only delays it. And delayed truth has a way of returning with sharper teeth. Claire stopped reading for a second, pressing her fingers against her temple. She remembered Emma as a child, always asking harder questions than anyone wanted to answer. She remembered the strange tension whenever school projects involved family trees. She remembered one Thanksgiving when Emma, only 13, had asked why all her baby pictures looked older than Claire's even though she was the younger sister. At the time, everyone laughed it off. Now Claire understood why no one laughed for long. She kept reading. When Emma found out at 17, she did not scream. That would have been easier. She simply looked at me like she no longer knew who I was. She asked me one question. Who decided I didn't deserve the truth? I had no answer good enough for her. I still do not. Linda's crying had grown quieter now, almost exhausted. Robert still had not spoken. Claire wondered how long he had carried this silence too. How many times he had almost said something and chosen family peace over honesty. The letter continued. She was angry with Linda, but her deepest anger was with me. She said I taught her to trust the very person who had hidden her life from her. She said every memory now felt edited. And she was right. I wanted time to heal it. She wanted truth to name it. Neither of us knew how to meet in the middle. Claire thought about the wedding again. Emma crossing Grandma's name off the guest list. Not an act of cruelty. A final boundary. A refusal to keep smiling through a wound no one else wanted to acknowledge. And suddenly, Claire felt ashamed of how quickly she had judged her sister. The letter reached its final pages. If Emma chose not to invite me to her wedding, then I accept it. Some people will call it disrespect. They will be wrong. It is grief. And grief often wears the face of anger because anger is easier to carry in public. If staying away gives her peace on the day she begins her new life, then that is my gift to her. Claire had to stop again. Her throat was tight. Even now, Evelyn had chosen understanding instead of defense. No wonder the empty chair had felt so heavy. It wasn't absence. It was sacrifice. Then came the final part. There is one more truth you deserve to know. Emma is not the only one I was protecting. Claire frowned and read the next line twice. Because suddenly the room shifted again. Robert knows more about Emma's father than he has ever admitted. Claire looked up sharply. Her father's face told her everything before he even spoke. Linda turned toward him slowly, confusion cutting through her tears. What does that mean? Robert stood up like a man walking toward judgment. For years he had been the quiet one, the steady one, the father who let Linda lead and Evelyn soften every conflict. But now his silence looked different. It looked like guilt. Claire rose to her feet. Dad. He stared at the floor for a long moment. Then finally said the words no one in that room was prepared for. The boy Linda was with. I knew him. Linda's expression hardened. You told me you barely remembered him. Robert nodded once. That was a lie. Claire felt the air leave her lungs. Because tonight, every truth seemed to open the door to another one. Robert looked older than Claire had ever seen him. He worked for my father one summer. I knew exactly who he was. When Linda told us she was pregnant, I went to find him before your mother even knew his full name. Linda stood, and Robert's voice cracked. He was married. The room fell still again. Not just older. Married. Claire stared at him. No. Robert nodded, shame written across every word. He was 28. He had a wife in another state. He told Linda he was single, that he was planning to move, that they would have a life together. None of it was true. Linda looked like she might collapse all over again. You told me he left because he was scared. Robert's eyes filled. I told you what I thought would hurt less. Claire stepped back, stunned. Emma had spent years believing she was abandoned by a careless young man. But the truth was worse. He hadn't been young and foolish. He had been older, deceptive, and already living another life. And Robert had known. All of it. The letter in Claire's hand suddenly felt heavier than ever. Because Grandma Evelyn hadn't just protected Linda. She had protected everyone from a truth too ugly to face. And now, on the night of Emma's wedding, there was nowhere left to hide. Linda stared at Robert like she was looking at a stranger wearing her husband's face. For years she had built her pain around one version of the story, a young man who got scared, ran away, and left her to carry the shame alone. That story had been painful enough. But this was something else. This meant every time she had cried over being abandoned, every time she had wondered if she had done something wrong, every time she blamed herself for trusting him, she had been grieving a lie. Her voice came out low and sharp. "You knew?" Robert nodded, unable to defend himself. "You let me believe that for 30 years. I thought it would protect you." Linda let out a bitter laugh, the kind that comes when hurt is too old for tears. "Protect me? Or protect yourself?" He had no answer, because they both knew the truth. Back then, Robert had not only been trying to shield his teenage daughter from scandal. He had been trying to protect the family name, the church whispers, the neighborhood gossip, the judgment that would follow if people learned the full story. A married man, an older man, a betrayal that would stain more than just Linda's future. Grandma Evelyn had stepped in because someone had to make a decision, and that decision became Emma's life. Claire looked between them, trying to understand how love and fear had become so tangled in this house that no one could separate them anymore. "Did Emma know this part?" she asked. Robert shook his head. No, she only knew Linda was her mother. She never knew who her father really was. Linda sat down slowly, like her legs no longer trusted the ground. "She asked me once," she whispered. "When she was 18. She asked if he ever loved me. I told her yes. I told her he was just weak." She looked at Robert with tears returning to her eyes. "And all this time, you let me say that." Robert's voice broke. "I was ashamed." Linda's reply was immediate. "So was I." The silence that followed felt endless. Claire turned back to the box, desperate for something solid to hold on to. There were still more letters, more papers, more pieces of a life rearranged by choices made before she was even born. She picked up another envelope, this one addressed simply, "For Emma." The handwriting was softer, slower. Written later. Maybe recently. Claire hesitated. She should read this herself. Linda nodded. Yes. But Claire already knew Emma wasn't going to walk into that house willingly. Not tonight. Not after the wedding. Not after years of anger finally breaking into action. If Emma had spent all these years forcing herself to stand in rooms built on lies, she would not come here because someone suddenly decided honesty mattered. Still, she needed to know. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Claire reached for her phone. Linda looked up. "What are you doing?" "I'm calling her." At her wedding reception? Claire met her mother's eyes. She deserves the truth more than she deserves one more fake smile tonight. Across town, Emma was standing under warm lights, surrounded by music and congratulations she could barely hear. Her wedding should have felt like the beginning of something. Instead, it felt like she was standing in the center of a performance everyone expected her to finish. Daniel was talking to his college friends near the bar. His mother was showing guests pictures from the honeymoon plans. People kept calling it the happiest day of her life. Emma had never felt more tired. Her phone vibrated in her hand. Claire. She almost ignored it. Then she answered. "What?" Claire didn't waste time. "We're at Grandma's house." Silence. Emma stepped away from the crowd, toward the quiet garden behind the venue. "What happened?" "She left." Emma closed her eyes. Of course she did. Part of her had expected it. Grandma Evelyn was many things, but she was never someone who would stay and fight loudly. She would disappear first, leave love behind in the form of silence. Claire continued. She left a box. Letters. Documents. Emma's breathing changed. She already knew what was coming. "Mom told you." "Yes." Another silence. But this one felt different. Not explosive, just tired. Emma sat on a stone bench beneath soft wedding lights and looked at the stars she couldn't really see. "So now everyone knows." Claire's voice softened. "There's more." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Claire hesitated. "Because how do you tell your sister, on her wedding night, that the father she spent years imagining was worse than absence?" She said it carefully. "Your father. Grandma wrote about him. Dad knew who he was." Emma stood up. "What?" Claire told her. Every word. The marriage. The lies. The age. The truth Robert had buried. By the end, Emma was shaking. Not crying. Shaking. Because rage had always been easier than grief. And now grief was winning. So all this time, she said quietly, I was the secret everyone protected themselves from. No, Claire said quickly. You were the person they were trying to protect. Emma laughed once, cold and hollow. Those are not the same thing. She was right. Claire had no argument. For years, Emma had been asked to live inside decisions she never made. To be grateful for protection she never requested. To accept love that came wrapped in silence. No wonder she had pushed Grandma away. No wonder the wedding invitation became a battlefield. Emma looked back toward the reception hall, where music still played and people still laughed, unaware that her entire life had just shifted again. She should have gone back inside. She should have returned to Daniel, smiled for more pictures, cut more cake, thanked more guests. Instead, she said the words Claire had been expecting. I'm coming there. Claire exhaled. Emma. No. I'm done hearing about my life secondhand. I'm done being everyone's unfinished apology. She hung up. Inside the reception hall, Daniel spotted her near the garden doors and smiled, raising his glass slightly. A husband waiting for his wife on the first night of their new life together. Emma looked at him and realized something painful. You cannot start a future while your past is still holding your throat. She walked back inside, not to celebrate, to leave. Daniel met her halfway. Everything okay? Emma looked at the man she had just married, kind and confused, and completely unaware that tonight had become something else entirely. And for the first time all day, she told the truth. No, she said, but I think it finally will be. Then she took off her heels, picked up the envelope Claire had left waiting for her, and walked out of her own wedding reception to face the family secret that had been waiting for her since the day she was born. The drive to Grandma Evelyn's house felt longer than it should have. Emma sat behind the wheel still wearing her wedding dress. The white fabric spread across the seat like proof of a life that had been interrupted halfway through. Her veil was gone, left somewhere near the garden bench. Her shoes sat on the passenger floor. Her phone kept vibrating with messages from Daniel, from friends, from relatives asking where she had gone, but she ignored every single one. For years, she had imagined this conversation, sometimes in anger, sometimes in tears, sometimes in silence, so heavy it felt like grief. But no matter how many times she played it in her head, she had never pictured it happening on her wedding night. The streets were nearly empty. Storefront lights reflected across the windshield. Every red light felt like an insult, another forced pause before a truth she had spent half her life chasing. When she finally pulled into Grandma Evelyn's driveway, Claire was already outside waiting. The porch light was still on. The same porch where Grandma had waved every first day of school. The same porch where Emma once sat at 12 years old, convinced she would run away because Linda grounded her for sneaking out. The same porch where everything had always felt safe. Tonight, it looked like a courtroom. Claire walked toward her slowly. For a moment, neither sister spoke. Emma looked past her, toward the front door. Is she really gone? Claire nodded. She left before the ceremony. Emma swallowed hard. She had wanted distance. She had wanted honesty. But she had not wanted this emptiness. Not like this. She stepped out of the car, gathering the heavy dress in her hands, and walked into the house without another word. Linda and Robert were still in the living room. The moment Linda saw her daughter standing there in a wedding gown, mascara fading, anger written across every step, she stood up like instinct still believed she could fix this with motherhood. Emma. Don't. One word. Sharp enough to stop the room. Emma looked at her mother, then at Robert, and then at the wooden box still sitting open on the table like evidence in a trial. All these years, she said, you let me call her Grandma. Linda's voice trembled. We thought. Emma cut her off. I know what you thought. I've heard that sentence my whole life. You thought you were protecting me. You thought it was better this way. You thought time would make it easier. Her eyes filled, but she refused to let the tears fall. Did you ever once ask what I wanted? Linda had no answer. Because the truth was no. At 16, Linda had been a scared girl, and Evelyn had been a desperate mother. The decisions were made around Emma long before she could speak. By the time she was old enough to ask questions, everyone had become too invested in the lie to stop it. Emma walked to the table and picked up the letter addressed to her. For Emma. Her fingers traced the handwriting. She had seen it on birthday cards, Christmas gifts, and recipes taped to the fridge. Now it felt like a confession. She looked at Claire. "You read it?" Claire shook her head. "No, that one's yours." Emma nodded once. Then she opened it. The room stayed silent as her eyes moved across the page. At first, her expression stayed hard, guarded. But line by line, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Something quieter. Something more dangerous. Understanding. She read slowly. "My dearest Emma, if you are holding this letter, then I have finally run out of time to say these things the right way. Maybe there was never a right way. Maybe there was only fear and love standing too close together for me to tell them apart. You asked me once who decided you did not deserve the truth. The answer is me, and I have hated myself for it every day since. I told myself I was protecting your mother. I told myself I was protecting you. But the truth is, I was also protecting myself. Because if I admitted what we had done, I would have to face the possibility that love is not always enough to excuse the harm we cause." Emma stopped reading. Her hands were shaking. Linda sat frozen, watching her daughter read the pain she had spent decades avoiding. Emma continued, "When I held you for the first time, I loved you before I had language for the guilt. I was your mother in every ordinary way, bandaging knees, checking homework, staying awake through fevers. But every beautiful memory carried a shadow because I knew one day you would ask where you came from, and I would have to choose between honesty and the life we had built. I chose the life, and I understand now why that felt like betrayal to you. Because it was." Emma pressed her lips together. That single sentence hit harder than every excuse she had heard for years. Not denial. Not justification. Truth. She kept reading. "You are angry that I let you build love on a foundation I knew was cracked. You should be angry. You are angry that I smiled in family photos while knowing part of your story had been taken from you. You should be angry for that too. But please believe this. Not one moment of my love for you was pretend. Not one bedtime story. Not one school recital. Not one whispered prayer over your sleeping head. I was guilty, but I was never false." The tears came then. Quietly. Against her will. Emma hated that they came. Because tears felt too close to surrender. But grief does not ask permission. She read the final page through blurred vision. "If you left me out of your wedding, I understand. A wedding is the beginning of a new life. And perhaps you could not begin while I was sitting there as the symbol of everything unfinished. I do not blame you. I only hope that one day, when your own life asks you to choose between perfect truth and imperfect love, you will remember that I chose badly, but I chose from love. And if loving you makes me the villain in your story, then I accept that role gladly. Because if given the chance again, I would still choose you. Always. Love, Mom. Mom. Not Grandma. Mom." Emma lowered the letter slowly. The room was silent except for her breathing. She stared at that final word longer than anything else. Because for years, she had refused to call Evelyn that in her own mind. It felt like betrayal to Linda. It felt like accepting the lie. But now, standing in the middle of the truth, she realized something painful. Both things were true. Linda was her mother, and Evelyn had been too. Love had never been the problem. Silence was. Emma looked at Linda, tears still on her face. "Did you ever want to tell me?" Linda broke. "Yes." The answer came fast, desperate. "Yes, 1,000 times. On birthdays. At graduation. When you asked about your father. When you looked at me like you knew something was missing. I wanted to tell you every single time." "Then why didn't you?" Linda's voice cracked. "Because every year I waited, it became harder. And because I was ashamed. Not of you. Never of you. Of myself. I hated that 16-year-old girl who made a mess she couldn't fix. And I let that shame become your inheritance." Emma closed her eyes. There it was. Not an excuse. A wound passed down. And suddenly, the anger she had carried for years felt heavier than before, because now it had shape. It had faces. It had fear. She turned to Robert. "And you?" His eyes were red. "I should have told you the truth about your father. I should have told Linda too. I thought hiding it would make the damage smaller. It only made it last longer." Emma nodded slowly. Then she asked the question that had haunted her since she was 17. Who was he? Robert hesitated. Because names make things real. And once spoken, they cannot be taken back. Robert stood there with the weight of 30 years pressing against his chest. For so long, silence had been easier than language. Silence let him pretend he had protected his family. Silence let him walk through birthdays and graduations and Sunday dinners without saying the name that could break everything open. But now Emma was standing in front of him in her wedding dress, holding a letter from the woman who raised her, and there was nowhere left to hide. He looked at her and spoke carefully, like each word could cut. His name was Michael Harrison. The room stayed still. Emma repeated it softly, as if testing whether it belonged to her. Michael Harrison. Robert nodded. He came to town for work. He worked under my father for a construction contract that lasted almost a year. He was charming, older, confident. The kind of man people trusted too quickly. Linda was 16 and believed every word he said. He told her he was single. He told her he was planning to stay. He told her they had a future. Linda stared at the floor. I believed him, she whispered. Robert continued. When she told him she was pregnant, he panicked. At first he promised he'd handle it. Then I found out the truth before he could disappear. Emma's voice was cold. You mean before you let him disappear? Robert accepted that. Yes. Claire watched her father closely. She had never seen him this honest. It looked painful. It also looked late. What happened? She asked. Robert sat down slowly, like the memory itself made him tired. I drove 3 hours to meet him. I went to the address he had given Linda. It wasn't his apartment. It was his house. His wife answered the door. Linda shut her eyes. Even now, hearing it aloud was like reliving the humiliation. Robert kept going. She had 2 children, a little boy and a baby girl. She had no idea who Linda was. No idea her husband had another life here. I stood there on that porch and realized every promise he made to my daughter had been built on lies. Emma gripped the edge of the table. And Robert looked at her. And I wanted to ruin him. I wanted to drag him back here and make him face what he'd done. But your grandmother, Evelyn, she stopped me. Emma frowned. She stopped you. Robert nodded. She said public revenge would not heal Linda. It would only create more damage. More shame. More gossip. More pain for children who had done nothing wrong. She said we needed to think about Linda, not about punishment. Emma laughed once, sharp and humorless. So everyone decided for everyone else. No one argued. Because again, she was right. Robert swallowed. I confronted him privately. I told him if he ever came near Linda again, I would make sure his wife knew everything. I told him if he ever tried to claim you years later like some guilty conscience project, I would make sure he regretted it. He left. I never saw him again. Emma stared at him. And that was it. No, Robert said quietly. That was the beginning of the lie. Because once Michael disappeared, the family had a choice. Tell the truth and face the judgment of a small town that fed on scandal, or bury it, and hope time made it survivable. Evelyn chose the second path, and everyone followed. Emma walked toward the window, needing distance from all of them. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful in the way ordinary nights are peaceful, as if families everywhere weren't carrying their own versions of this exact pain. She thought about Michael Harrison, a man she had imagined 1,000 different ways. Sometimes a coward, sometimes a lost boy, sometimes someone who regretted leaving. But never this. Never a grown man with another family. Never someone who had already chosen another life before she even existed. She turned back. Is he alive? Robert hesitated. Yes. The word hit harder than she expected. Alive. Breathing somewhere. Existing while she spent years building herself around his absence. Where? Linda looked up sharply. Emma. No, Emma's voice was firm. I've spent my entire life living with decisions made by everyone else. I'm asking where he is. Robert rubbed his face. A few years ago, I heard he moved to Colorado. His wife passed away. I don't know if he remarried. I never followed closely. Emma nodded slowly. Colorado. A real place. A real life. Not a ghost. Claire stepped closer. What are you thinking? Emma answered honestly. I don't know. And that was true. Part of her wanted to drive there tomorrow and stand on his doorstep just to watch his face when he saw her. Part of her wanted nothing from him. Not explanations, not apologies, not recognition. Just distance. But another part, the quiet, dangerous part, wanted one simple thing. The truth from the person who had started all of it. She sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. Her wedding dress felt ridiculous now, like a costume from someone else's life. Claire sat beside her. You don't have to decide tonight. Emma let out a breath. Tonight was supposed to be about deciding forever. Claire almost smiled. Maybe it still is. Just not the way you planned. For the first time that night, Emma's expression softened. She looked around Grandma Evelyn's living room, the same room where Christmas stockings were hung, where school report cards were celebrated, where she learned to ride out heartbreak with pie and old movies. A room full of love and lies sitting side by side. And she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to admit. She missed her. Not the version of Evelyn from the lie. The real one. The complicated one. The woman who had made terrible choices and still loved her with everything she had. Where did she go? Emma asked. Linda shook her head. She didn't say. Claire pointed to another folded paper in the box. There was something else. A receipt. From a retirement community near the coast. Small place. Quiet. About 2 hours away. Emma picked it up. Seabrook Shore's retirement home. Of course. Somewhere peaceful. Somewhere Evelyn could disappear without making it dramatic. Emma stared at the name. For years she had prepared herself for confrontation, for yelling, accusations, demands. But now, after the letter, all she wanted was a conversation she should have had long ago. Not as granddaughter and grandmother. Not even as daughter and mother. Just as two people standing inside the same truth. Linda watched her carefully. You're going to see her. It wasn't a question. Emma nodded. Yes. Linda stood, panic returning. Tonight. Emma looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. The wedding reception was probably over by now. Guests were probably inventing stories to explain her disappearance. Daniel was probably still waiting for answers she hadn't yet learned how to give. But some moments do not wait for convenient timing. Yes, she said. Tonight. Robert opened his mouth to object, then stopped. Maybe because after years of controlling the story, he understood this part no longer belonged to him. Claire stood up too. Then I'm coming with you. Emma shook her head. No, I need to do this alone. Claire wanted to argue, but she understood. Some conversations are too personal for witnesses. She hugged her sister instead. A real hug, the kind they had both avoided for too long. When they pulled apart, Claire whispered, whatever happens, don't leave with more silence. Emma nodded. She looked once more at Linda and Robert. There was still so much unresolved between them. Forgiveness was nowhere near tonight. But truth had finally entered the room, and sometimes that is where healing begins. She folded Evelyn's letter carefully and placed it inside her bag. Then she walked back to her car under the quiet porch light, still wearing the wedding dress she had left her own reception in. A bride driving into the night, not toward a honeymoon, but toward the woman who had spent her whole life loving her the wrong way and the right way at the same time. And somewhere by the sea, Grandma Evelyn was waiting, whether she knew it or not. The highway to Seabrook Shores was nearly empty, stretched out under a dark sky that felt too wide for sleep. Emma drove with both hands tight on the steering wheel, her wedding dress gathered awkwardly around her legs, the silence in the car louder than any music could have been. Streetlights passed like slow flashes of memory, and every mile made the night feel more unreal. Most brides spent the first hours after their wedding laughing in hotel rooms, opening gifts, taking photographs they would keep for decades. Emma was driving toward a retirement home by the ocean, carrying a letter from the woman she had spent years trying not to forgive. Her phone lit up again. Daniel. 7 missed calls. 3 messages. Where are you? Are you okay? Please talk to me. Emma stared at the screen at the next red light. Daniel had been nothing but kind, patient, honest, the kind of man people called safe, and meant it as the highest compliment. She had loved that about him. Maybe because so much of her life had been built on uncertainty, she had chosen someone steady. And yet tonight, she had walked out of her own reception without explaining anything. Because how do you tell your new husband that your wedding day became the night your entire identity changed again? She finally pressed call. He answered on the first ring. Emma. His voice carried worry, confusion, and something close to fear. She closed her eyes for a second. I'm sorry. Where are you? Driving. To where? She hesitated, because saying it aloud made it real. To see Evelyn. He was quiet. Not because he was angry, because he was trying to understand. At midnight. In your wedding dress. A small, tired laugh escaped her despite everything. Yeah, that sounds dramatic when you say it like that. Emma, he said softly, what happened? She gripped the wheel tighter. The short version? My family spent 30 years lying to me, and tonight they finally ran out of places to hide. Silence. Then Daniel asked the only question that mattered. Do you want me to come? Emma felt tears rise again, not from sadness this time, but from the relief of being asked instead of managed. She shook her head, even though he couldn't see it. No, I need to do this myself. Another pause. Then he said, okay. No guilt. No pressure. Just okay. That nearly broke her more than anything else. She whispered, I left you at our wedding. You left a party, he replied. Marriage is longer than one night. Emma pressed her lips together, trying not to cry while driving. I don't know what happens after tonight. Daniel answered honestly. Neither do I. But I know this. You don't have to choose between telling the truth and being loved. If we're doing this for real, then we start there. Emma pulled over for a moment because suddenly she couldn't see the road through her tears. For so much of her life, love had come tied to silence, to protection, to secrets people called kindness. Daniel was offering something terrifyingly simple. Truth. She breathed out slowly. Thank you. I'll be here when you come back, he said. Not if. When. That mattered. She ended the call and sat there for a moment, staring at the dark road ahead. For the first time all night, she felt something besides anger. Hope. Not the bright, easy kind. The quiet kind. The kind that survives after everything else burns down. She started driving again. An hour later, the sign appeared. Seabrook Shores Retirement Home. Small white letters near a quiet coastal road, framed by tall grass moving in the wind. Beyond it, she could hear the ocean before she could see it. It was exactly where Evelyn would choose to disappear. Peaceful. Simple. Far from family noise. Emma parked and sat there for a long moment. This was it. For years, she had rehearsed rage. She had imagined confrontations sharp enough to finally balance the scale of hurt she carried. She had pictured accusing Evelyn, demanding explanations, forcing her to feel the same confusion she had lived with. But after the letter, anger no longer felt clean, because love had complicated everything, and love was standing on the other side of that door. She stepped out of the car. The night air was cold against her skin. Somewhere nearby, waves crashed softly against the shore like a heartbeat too old to rush. Inside, the lobby lights were dim. A night receptionist looked up from her desk, startled for only a second before deciding a bride arriving after midnight was not the strangest thing she had seen. Can I help you? Emma nodded. I'm looking for Evelyn Carter. The receptionist checked a list, then looked up with a knowing expression. She's awake. Of course she was. Maybe Evelyn had been waiting. Room 214, the woman said gently. End of the hall. Left side. Emma thanked her and walked slowly down the hallway. Every step felt heavier. Photographs lined the walls, old couples smiling, community dinners, sunsets over the water, lives reduced to frames and memory. At the end of the hall, she stopped. Room 214. The door was slightly open. A warm lamp glowed inside. Emma stood there, suddenly afraid. Not of anger. Of softness. Because anger protects. Softness asks you to risk being hurt again. She pushed the door open. Grandma Evelyn was sitting by the window in a pale blue sweater, looking out toward the dark ocean like she had known exactly when Emma would arrive. She turned slowly. For a second, neither of them moved. Emma had imagined this moment so many times, but reality was quieter than revenge. Evelyn looked tired. Smaller somehow, but her eyes were the same. Steady. Knowing. Full of love that had always made things harder. She looked at Emma's wedding dress first, then at her face. And with heartbreaking calm, she said the words only a mother could say after years of silence. You should be dancing tonight. Emma's voice cracked immediately. And you should have been there. That was it. The first truth between them. And suddenly all the years between 17 and tonight were standing in the room too. Evelyn nodded once, accepting the pain inside those words. I know. Emma stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She held the letter tightly. I read this. Evelyn looked at it. I hoped you would. Emma stared at her. For years, I wanted you to deny it. I wanted you to tell me there was some explanation that would make all of this feel less like betrayal. But you didn't. You just told the truth. Evelyn's hands rested quietly in her lap. At my age, honesty becomes cheaper than regret. Emma almost laughed through the tears, threatening again. That sounds like something you'd write in a birthday card. It probably is. For the first time, they both smiled. Small, fragile, but real. Then Emma asked the question that had followed her for years. Why didn't you just tell me? Evelyn looked out at the ocean for a moment before answering. Because every year I waited, I thought I was protecting one more happy memory. And every year I was really just making the truth heavier for you to carry later. She turned back to Emma. And because I was selfish. I was afraid if I told you too soon, you would stop being mine. The honesty of that hurt more than excuses ever could. Emma sat down across from her. You were afraid I'd leave. Evelyn nodded. Yes. Emma's eyes filled. I did leave. A quiet silence passed between them. Then Evelyn said softly, no. You stepped back from pain. That is not the same as leaving. And for the first time since she was 17, Emma felt understood instead of managed. But there was still one truth left. The one she had driven all night carrying. She looked at Evelyn and asked, did you ever think about telling me who my father really was? Evelyn's expression changed the moment the question left Emma's mouth. It was small, almost invisible, but Emma saw it. A flicker of old pain. The kind that had been lived with for so long it no longer arrived as shock, only exhaustion. She folded her hands together and looked down at them for a moment before answering. Every day, Emma sat still, waiting. Evelyn let out a slow breath. There were nights when you were little, after I tucked you into bed, when I would stand in the hallway and think, tomorrow I'll tell her everything. Tomorrow I'll start fixing this. But then tomorrow came, and you would run downstairs asking for pancakes or showing me a school drawing. And I would look at your face and choose one more ordinary day instead. Emma's voice was quiet. And when I was older? Evelyn met her eyes. Then I was afraid for different reasons. She reached for the glass of water beside her bed, but didn't drink. You were 17 when you found out about Linda. Angry, hurt, and right to be both. I kept telling myself if I gave you time, maybe we could survive that part first. I thought if I told you everything at once, I would lose you completely. Emma nodded slowly. So you decided for me again. Evelyn accepted that without defense. Yes. The honesty hurt, but it also made the room lighter somehow. There was no performance left. No one pretending good intentions erased damage. Emma leaned back in the chair. Tell me about him. Evelyn looked toward the window again, toward the dark line where the ocean disappeared into night. Michael Harrison was the kind of man small towns excuse too easily. Charming. Helpful. The kind who knew how to make older people trust him and younger girls feel seen. He made Linda feel special at a time when she desperately wanted to be. That is not love. But when you are 16, attention can feel like love if no one teaches you the difference. Emma listened without moving. Evelyn continued. When I found out, I was furious with Linda at first. I was scared, and fear often disguises itself as anger. But when Robert went to confront him and came back with the truth, I understood. Linda had not made a reckless mistake. She had been lied to by a grown man who knew exactly what he was doing. Emma's jaw tightened, and he just went back to his life. Evelyn nodded. Yes, that was the part one could never forgive. Not the affair. The ease. The way he stepped back into his own life, while ours was rearranged forever. Emma thought about the word ease. How simple it must have been for him to disappear. How complicated it had been for everyone left behind. Did he ever ask about me? Evelyn was quiet for too long, and that silence gave Emma her answer before the words did. Yes, she said finally. Once. Emma's chest tightened. When? About 5 years after you were born. The room seemed smaller. Evelyn's voice remained steady, but Emma could hear how carefully she had buried this memory. He came back to town for work. He asked Robert if he could see you. Just once, he said. He claimed he had changed, that he regretted leaving, that he wanted to know if you were happy. Emma stared at her, and Evelyn's face hardened in a way Emma had almost never seen. I told Robert no. I said a man who could vanish that easily did not get to return because guilt had become inconvenient. I said you were not a chapter he could reopen when it suited him. Emma blinked, surprised by the sharpness in her voice. You stopped him? Yes. Why? Evelyn looked offended by the question. Because I was your mother. The words landed heavily. Not possessive. Protective. Raw. She continued. I had already taken too much from you by hiding the truth. I was not going to let him walk in and make your life smaller just so he could feel like a better man. Emma looked down at the letter in her hands. For years she had imagined herself abandoned. Tonight she was learning she had also been defended. Badly. Imperfectly. But fiercely. That was harder to process than anger. She asked the question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. If he showed up now, would you tell me to see him? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Because this one was different. This was no longer about protecting a child. It was about respecting a woman. Finally she said, I would tell you that closure is often a story people sell themselves. Sometimes meeting the person does not heal the wound. Sometimes it only proves they were never carrying it as heavily as you were. Emma swallowed. And if I still wanted to go? Evelyn nodded once. Then I would tell you to go as yourself. Not as the little girl waiting to be chosen. Not as the angry daughter demanding repair. Go as the woman who survived without him. That hit something deep. Because for so much of her life, Emma had framed herself around absence. Who would she be if she stopped doing that? She stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the ocean moved in the dark like it had moved before any of them were born and would continue long after their apologies were gone. I spent years thinking the reason I was angry at you was because of the lie, she said quietly. But I think part of me was angry because you loved me enough to become the villain. And that made it harder to hate you. Evelyn smiled sadly. That sounds like something your mother would say. Emma turned. She's hurting. I know. She said she wanted to tell me. 1,000 times. Evelyn nodded. I know that too. Emma frowned. Then why didn't you make her? A small smile touched Evelyn's face. You think I had that much control over Linda? She inherited my stubbornness and improved it. Despite everything, Emma laughed. A real laugh this time. It startled both of them. And then the laughter disappeared just as quickly, leaving honesty in its place. Emma sat back down. There's something else. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Daniel. Emma sighed. Of course you knew. You arrived here in a wedding dress at 1 a.m. I made an educated guess. Emma rubbed her face. I left my own reception. I barely explained anything. I just left. Evelyn's expression softened. And what did he say? Emma thought about his voice on the phone. Marriage is longer than one night. She smiled faintly. He said I left a party, not a marriage. Evelyn's eyes filled with quiet approval. Then marry that man properly. Emma laughed again, wiping at her eyes. I think I already did. For a moment, the room felt lighter. Not fixed, not healed, but honest. And maybe that was the beginning. Then Emma reached into her bag and pulled out the folded receipt Claire had found. Seabrook Shores. She placed it on the table. Were you planning to stay here forever? Evelyn looked at it. I was planning to stop being the center of a war. Emma shook her head. You don't get to disappear like that. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Is that your professional opinion as the bride who disappeared from her own wedding? Emma smiled despite herself. Fair point. But then her face turned serious. I'm not saying everything is okay. It isn't. I'm still angry. I still don't know what forgiveness looks like. But I do know this. If we're going to figure out what happens next, you have to be there for it. Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you asking me to come home? Emma looked at her for a long moment. Then she answered with the truth. No, I'm asking you to stop leaving before people get the chance to stay. And for the first time that night, Grandma Evelyn cried.